Kia ora and welcome to another episode of The Leadership Lounge, a space for healthcare leaders to take a break, to take a pause, a moment to reflect, to take a deep breath, get a fresh perspective on the work that they do, that you do. I'm Katie, I'm your host, and I help leaders and those that work in healthcare to manage the demands and the complexity of their work so that they can feel supported and encouraged and enabled in the incredibly important work that they do. So this week, I've been thinking about clinical leadership. There's a consultation document out at the moment that a few people have been talking to me about, and it's this element of clinical leadership. So I've just been reflecting on that and using my own experiences in terms of that clinical leadership and different spaces and jobs I've been in. And I realised that, or I recalled, and I definitely hear it, that you often as a clinical leader get given parts of a job. You know, so you're not full-time in one thing. You're a bit of this and a bit in that. You're 0.4 here or 0.2 here, or you take a clinical leadership role that is 0.5 in this and then you're doing another thing. And you often end up doing this mix of jobs. And I know a number of people that end up in that kind of setting. And there's been a point in my career where I was in a nurse practitioner role, and I was also working clinically as a charge nurse. So these two quite senior roles I was holding onto at the same time. Now, I don't know, but I generally say to people now that actually trying to manage two part-time jobs or two elements of jobs is actually really hard, because it is, okay, so does this fit in this job, or does this fit in this job? Or am I going to do that job on a Tuesday and I'm going to do the rest of it? But then what happens if something comes up on a Thursday that's to do with this job? It can be really hard, and it can often feel like you're not doing two jobs or three jobs that are part-time. You're actually doing three full-time jobs, and that can be exhausting. And certainly when I was doing those two jobs, and I can't even remember now, but if it was 0.5 of each, I was absolutely loving the space of it. And so it was really hard to say no, and I was taking on more and more, and found myself in this space of, quite concerningly, not knowing if I was going to harm myself or if actually patients might end up harmed, because I was just so exhausted from doing everything. Now, I think whenever I talk about well-being and whenever we have conversations about burnout, I think it is really important to walk that line between the fact that there is a responsibility from the system and the organisation to be able to make work achievable. And I think there's some big conversations to be had in that space. But there is equally some importance around the self-responsibility around things. My own ego was showing up. I was loving the fact that within this job, everyone was coming to me and asking me different things. I was getting to try and do new things. It was a real fast track moment in my career, and I was absolutely loving it. So I have a level of responsibility around saying no or asking for help. And I really struggled in that space to be able to articulate what I would need help with. It was like a sort of, it was such a whirlwind that I was in. The thought of just stopping and pausing and thinking about it just seems completely foreign to me now when I reflect back on what it felt like at the time. So when you care deeply about the work that you do, you're often really enjoying the work that you do, it can be very easy to find yourself in this kind of state of suddenly, oh my goodness, how am I actually supposed to do all these things that are being asked of me and all these things that you've said yes to? Or the mix and the blend of the things, if you are managing a couple of different potentially connected jobs in that part-time basis, which actually ends up being more than a full-time job. So as I was thinking about this and reflecting back on that, I was wondering what would I advise myself now? Now I come a long way. That was quite a while ago in my career now. I've learned a lot more. I've experienced a lot more. What advice would I give myself, or what do I wish I had known then or could do then. So that got me thinking about, what would have made a difference and what would have been practical in that setting. So some things that I probably wasn't aware of at the time was the kind of pause self-assessment thing. The tools that we can use to take a bit of a stock take on what's going on with our lives in general. I've just run a series of free webinars that have been kind of like a speed intro to the Healthy Mind Platter, which is a great tool to take a bit of a stock take of, where are all the things in my life? It looks at seven elements, and where are all the things in my life and how am I tracking against those things? How am I doing if I were to give myself a score? Another tool often seen is that kind of that idea of the wheel of life. When you're looking at things like your social and your finances and your career and your family, all of those kind of things. There's lots of different elements. I've got a really great one, a free download from a fabulous company, and I'll pop the link to where you can get that download as well as the information on the Healthy Mind Platter in the show notes and the links and the resources. But I think if I had stopped and just taken that moment, it's kind of like a 5-10 minute job, right? To just go, how am I doing? It's your score. No one can judge you. If you think you're a 5 out of 10 on sleep, you're a 5 out of 10 on sleep. No one is going to correct you on that. This is how you feel. Your inner sense of how things are doing. It's a chance to be really honest and self-reflective. It's an inward moment of, how are things going? I think if I had done that, I would have started to realise that actually I was doing nothing but work. I was thinking, breathing, eating, sleeping, everything was work. And in fact, my now husband, who was my boyfriend, partner, whatever, boyfriend sounds quite fun, at the time, he said, later on, he said, we nearly split up then because you were so obsessed by work. And I was absolutely gobsmacked because I didn't really notice that, to be quite honest. But yeah, this kind of really honest conversation we had about actually how I was. And it was because I was doing nothing else but this thinking and doing about work. And kidding myself that I was doing stuff that I loved. I was actually trying to fool myself. And I think an assessment of some sort, a sort of a stock take, would have given me a bit of a jolt to realise, things aren't quite as okay as I'm pretending they are. There might be some gaps or some areas in my life that are not as good as they could be or should be. So using a tool such as the Healthy Mind Platter or a Wheel of Life kind of element gives you that kind of outside perspective. It's almost someone kind of saying, give yourself a little bit of a rating, come and give yourself a bit of a score. And that might have given me that bit of a jolt. I think the other thing that I have always been into, I've kept a diary or a journal of some sort for years, for many, many years. And actually, when I reflect back, I was probably not doing it as much then. But if I had had a sort of a reflection journal prompting sheet that had just asked me a few questions, that might have helped open up the conversation, particularly in connection with that kind of wheel of life or assessment type of check-in, that stock take of how things. I think if I had had something that I could just ask myself some questions and kind of, self-coach myself a little bit. And that idea of asking myself, what's the gap in my thinking right now? Or what's the real challenge for you right now? When you're looking at all these things, what's the real challenge for you? So just those couple of style of questions, I particularly like, what's the real challenge for you now? It's quite a question I use a lot for myself and when I'm working with people. But another really good question, particularly if you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure and, you're trying to do all this stuff and you have no idea which way to turn, asking yourself, if a friend came to you with this problem, what advice would you give them? And what I really love about that is that it gives you permission to step outside of where you're at and to look at it from a different perspective. And actually, that's the whole point of this podcast, is that enabling a different perspective on the work that you're doing. So this is actually the question that you can ask yourself when you're facing something that you're not sure what to do. What advice would you give a friend? It's allowing yourself to tap into the best you, the part of your wisdom and your experience and your knowledge. You know a lot of stuff. What advice would you give a friend? The third thing I wish I had done back then, I wish I had known about it, had access to it, had done it, was actually to get a coach. Now, being able to talk through and be challenged and be guided by a coach when you're in an intense situation, when you're dealing with overwhelm, when you're trying to manage high demand workload, is absolutely phenomenal. It was a game changer for me as soon as I started getting coaching. And while this potentially sounds like a bit of a setup for contacting me to be your coach, delighted if you did that. But it's not about that. It's about accepting that idea that an external person, somebody else to go and talk through, to work with around where you're at, where you're getting stuck, where you want to get to, is actually a phenomenal thing to do. And I think of all the things, I wish I had access to a coach back then and realised that was the case, because I was struggling to articulate what my challenges were. I was having quite confrontational conversations with the people I was working with because I was so stuck and I wasn't sure. And I think if I had had somebody that I could actually blurt it all out to and then help refine what I was actually trying to say and do, and actually what I needed, that asking for help and explaining my situation would have been a much easier and a much more productive conversation I could have had. That's definitely what I would have done. So they're the three things. It's felt like that's been quite a speedy kind of run through this week, but it was that reflection on my part around what are the things that I wish I had known in that time. The most overwhelmed I'd felt. I felt overwhelmed and swamped with work at lots of points in my career, but it was this idea of, when we get clinical leadership roles or parts of roles, you're asked to do bits of this and bits of that. It can be really hard to manage all of those components. And the fact that we have lives as well, and all the stuff that goes on in lives. Work is a part of our life. It's not all of it. That was the mistake I was making back then, that work was everything. So it was good to reflect on a time when I was juggling those two part-time jobs in two intense roles, and thinking, what advice would I have liked to have heard? What tips would I have appreciated and benefited from? And really then passing them on to you listening. So if that sounds like you, or if it sounds like somebody that you know, please do just flick them this. I'd love it. Really appreciate it if you shared this podcast, because right now there are a number of people that are sitting in these kind of spaces of feeling that they have to hold it all themselves and this keeping it all together, and that is exhausting. And it definitely doesn't leave to our best selves. And we have lots of work to do, and there is lots of opportunities out there, and it is, as I'm often saying, it's this long game that we're playing here. So if you are managing a high workload, if you're trying to juggle several jobs at a time, if you're coordinating projects inside and outside of work and you've got all this stuff, then pick one of those things. Make a tweak. So whether it be do one of those assessments, those stock takes on life in general, and where could you get some help, or where could you make a change? Or is it a bit of journaling, a bit of self-coaching with some questions? There's something about the journaling part, because often we can think we can do that bit in our heads, but it's actually the writing down. Something different happens, something magical quite happens when we're writing it down. Or is it that opportunity to go, hey, you know what? I could do with a few coaching sessions. That would be great, because that's going to help me just untangle where I'm at and make a bit of a plan to go forward. I want to say just a little bit more about those assessment things. And like I said, the two I've been talking about is this healthy mind platter. And that's a way of thinking about the mix of things that we need in our lives to be mentally well, similar to what we need on our food plates for staying physically well. And the other one, this idea of those wheel of life scales that you can do, and you kind of mark yourself off. So the scoring idea, that's what I meant to sort of dig into a little bit more, is that we can often scale ourselves, whether it be a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 scale or a percentage scale. You give yourself a bit of a score, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, my sleep is great. I'm an 8 out of 10 at sleep, but no, my connecting time or my family or my friends' time, no, I'm really not doing very well on there. I'm probably down at a 2 there. That's a bit embarrassing, but I'm a 2 or something. Yeah, exercise. Yeah, I'm doing all right exercise. I'm probably a 4 or 5 there. I'm probably okay. And so on. So you work through all of those things like in that kind of way and give yourself a score. What we often do, and our tendency, is because we have a natural negativity bias, and because the draw is always to the low score, we will look at those things. We'll go, right, family time. Yeah, you were a 2 out of 10. That's terrible. We beat ourselves up a little bit, which does us no good. But 2, we then try and focus on that bit. What can I do? What can I do? The trick with these things, this is my top tip advice here, is to aim midway. So in my example that I randomly made up there, physical was 4 or 5 out of 10. Now, if I'm already halfway to 10, that's actually pretty awesome. Celebrate where you're at. Actually, whatever your score is, celebrate where you're at. If it's not a 0, celebrate it. And then it's about recognizing that you've obviously already got some momentum. There's obviously already a pattern or a habit or something that you are doing, a non-negotiable that you have created in your life that is allowing you to be consistent. So I've given myself a score of 4, 5 out of 10. If you go, how would I make that a 6? You just tweak it up a little bit. You're working in an area that you've already got some momentum, some motivation, some plan, some action. So it's actually a bit easier. So rather than going, flip, that's down at a 2. That's going to be really hard. I don't do anything at all. What am I going to need to do? It's a bit of a harder slog. So starting with something in the middle, you've already got a bit of energy there, and that's going to be a bit easier, and that's going to give you that sense of achievement and motivation and success, and that's going to encourage you to do more. And equally, I think you know this, but our lives are not neat little boxes that you can turn into a little plan or a score chart. We are a swirling mass of everything. So if you up one score, you are likely to up all of them because you're just giving yourself permission to pay attention to yourself. And so upping your physical score is likely to impact on your sleep score. And potentially if I'm walking, I might go, hey, to my brother, should we go for a walk together? And we start to up that connecting family or friend time as well. So often there's some synergistic elements within it. Now, the other thing on the scoring factor, now I've been, using that score of 0 to 10, 0 being absolutely nothing, 10 being perfect or wonderful. We are not meant to be 10 out of 10 on all of those factors all of the time. Particularly when it comes to things like the healthy mind platter. One of the elements in the healthy mind platter is focus time. Now and if you think about work on a wheel, the wheel of life, there are times when work demands a bit more of us. Something's coming on and we have got to up the score a bit there, and that's okay. So being 10 out of 10 on everything is not the aim. The aim is to just notice and give information and go, okay, how's that stacking up against what I would like or what I need or what is going to be useful for right now? So when we're sick, our physical, I'm always paying much more attention to my physical well-being when I am feeling ill. It's because hurting myself or feeling ill, I really don't like. And I really value my well-being much more in that time of feeling sick. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But so I then put a bit of more effort into that area. So everything's always in flux and always this kind of up and it's always in that sort of up and down space. The other thing that not having to be 10 out of 10 on everything all the time gives you the grace for is this idea of tweaking. So in your head, you've already imagined what 10 out of 10 looks like and feels like. But actually, if you're sitting at a 4 or a 5, you've only got to get to 6. Or if you're a 7 or an 8, you've only got to get to 9. You've only got to tweak it up a little bit. Let's not try and jump. You just have to make those small steps. And I think that's one of those key things that just keeps coming back and time again, that the small steps, small consistent steps are going to create the big impact. So if you're doing something on a regular sort of basis, you'll suddenly then 6 months later do another stock take and you'll go, I'm a 7 out of 10 now. That's really cool. So these are a great tool to stop and do a stock take, but equally is important to then go back and have another little look. There's one of the tools I'll share is for the Healthy Mind Platter is actually something you can track over the week. And this is something I've done at work with a team I worked with where we used the 5 ways of well-being. I made a little tracking chart and we said, we're going to see how we're doing in the 5 ways of well-being. Equally, you could do something like Tafala Tapafa, or what we talked about last week, which is that sharpening the saw. Huge connection with that. It's obviously where my mind has been at, about this idea of how do we think about our whole selves as well as the work that we need to do. Now, I've given you 3 ideas there. That idea if you're struggling with or trying to manage that sort of complexity of juggling different elements of your job or a high workload, pick one of those things. I've gone through those 3 things and make a tweak. And that small steps is going to make a big difference. But equally, it might be about doing 2 of them or 3 of them, or actually how they can be synergistic. And in fact, sometimes you could be so in the space of, I can't see the wood for the trees. I don't even know how to stop and do this thing. Sometimes it can be best to start with the coach. And one of my most popular blog posts is around this idea of your square squad, the people that you really trust, that you can be very honest and vulnerable with, but are also going to be able to challenge you and tell you and ask some of those questions and challenge you a little bit into that space. Tell you that you need to get some help or be that great coach for you in terms of asking you a couple of questions so that you can take that first step and get that little bit of clarity over where is the wood for the trees in this kind of space. So it might be that starting with a coach is the place to go. It might be that starting with journaling is the thing that is going to work for you. Or it could be that starting with one of those self-assessments. I think the main lesson or the main point is that hopefully this is the message, this is the sign you've been looking for, as they could say, to not stay stuck in that space of overwhelm and just trying to take more and more on and having it loaded in and just keeping going and going and going, because that is where we can then run into problems. So this week I took a bit of a reflection back down my career path and thought about a time when I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and the trouble that it ended me up in, that I was definitely a stage of suffering from burnout, was very concerned I was going to hurt myself or harm a patient, and that nearly caused the end of my relationship. And so reflecting back on that and thinking, what advice would I give myself back then? What top tips would I share that would have helped me in those moments? And those 3 ideas that have come to mind. Some type of stock take. Being able to just step back a little bit and think about my life from a different perspective other than just work. The idea of journaling, writing something down with some sort of self-coaching, prompting questions that would just allow a free flow of ideas around things so I could get that different perspective. Or I wish I could have worked with a coach. I wish I'd understood the value of coaching and what I could have got from that, and actually being able to sit with someone who could have guided through a conversation where I could have started to untangle the challenges that I was having in that moment. So if you're in any of those kind of situations and those sound like something that could be useful to you, all the links will be in the show notes. I'd love it if you'd sign up for the No Jedi email, where I continually share tips and ideas. It's a short email that is a bright spot in your inbox, designed to inspire and motivate people that are working and leading in healthcare. And I will be back next week. I am Katie, your host. Thank you again for listening to another episode of The Leadership Lounge. Take care, have fun, and I think you are probably doing better than you think. Talk to you next week in The Leadership Lounge. Take care.